The sterile, antiseptic scent of the hospital waiting room clung to the back of my throat, a chemical ghost that promised both healing and despair. It was 2:37 a.m. Outside, a thunderstorm raged against the city, the rain battering the panoramic windows of the ICU waiting area on the 15th floor like a frantic, desperate fist. Each flash of lightning threw the Manhattan skyline into stark, skeletal relief, a jagged EKG of a city that never slept, even when its inhabitants were dying. My own heart beat in a frantic, erratic rhythm against my ribs. For the past 6 hours, my younger sister Sophia had been in surgery, a hit and run. The doctors used words like critical and touch and go, sterile terms that did nothing to numb the raw, searing terror that had taken root in my soul. I was Madison Martinez. At 27, I was a pediatric nurse, trained to offer comfort in the face of fear, yet here I sat, utterly helpless, clutching a cold cup of vending machine coffee, as if it were a lifeline. My parents were gone, taken by a similar violence on a rain-slicked road 5 years ago, leaving me as Sophia's sole guardian. The weight of that responsibility felt heavier tonight than ever before. Desperate for a distraction, for any semblance of control, I pulled out my phone. I needed to leave a message for our uncle, the last remaining piece of our family, a man who had made his disapproval of our life in the city painfully clear. I found a deserted corridor, the silence broken only by the hum of machinery and the distant storm. I pressed record, my voice a raw, trembling whisper. "Uncle Ben, it's Madison. It's Sophia. She's been in an accident. They don't know if she's going to... Please, just call me back. I don't know what to do." As the words choked in my throat, 2 men rounded the corner, their expensive leather shoes making no sound on the polished linoleum. Their presence was an immediate intrusion, a tear in the fabric of the night's heavy silence. They weren't doctors or grieving family members. They radiated an aura of cold, predatory power, their tailored suits looking utterly out of place amidst the quiet desperation of the hospital. The older one, radiating an almost visible chill of authority, spoke into his phone, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that cut through the air like splintered glass. "The transport is compromised. Our informant at the port confirms the feds are moving the witness tonight, using an ambulance as cover to throw us off." My blood ran cold. My thumb hovered over the stop button on my phone, but I froze. "Witness? Feds?" The younger man, his face a mask of brutal impatience, replied. "So we intercept the ambulance. Make it look like another tragic accident on the bridge. No witness, no testimony." "It's not that simple," the first man countered, his voice sharp with annoyance. "The witness is former Agent Petrov. He knows our protocols. He'll be expecting a direct assault. We need leverage, something to ensure his silence, permanently." He paused, and in that fleeting silence I could feel the weight of a life hanging in the balance. My own grief felt suddenly, terrifyingly small in comparison. "What kind of leverage?" The man let out a cold, humorless chuckle, a sound that seemed to curdle the air. "Petrov has a daughter, a student at Columbia. We've had eyes on her for weeks. If her father won't be silent, she will be silenced for him. A message, loud and clear." My heart stopped. Columbia. That was Sophia's university. The thought, irrational and panicked, shot through me like a bolt of ice. "It's a clean job," the man continued, his tone chillingly casual, as if discussing a business transaction. "Victor's team is on standby. They'll grab the girl from her dorm. No one will even know she's gone until her father's body is found." My recording was still active. My phone, held in a trembling hand, was capturing every single horrific word. This was more than a conspiracy. It was a death sentence being signed in a hospital corridor, a place meant for saving lives. I shrank back into the shadows of a small alcove, my breath shallow, every nerve screaming. I had to stop the recording, delete it, pretend I was just another ghost haunting these halls. But then the first man turned his head slightly, and a sliver of fluorescent light caught his features. A face of brutal elegance, with eyes as dark and cold as a winter night, and a cruel, thin-lipped smile. It was a face I recognized from the darkest corners of the news, a name whispered with fear and reverence in the city's hidden corridors of power: Franco D'Amico, the head of the D'Amico crime family. At that exact moment, a nurse bustled around the corner, her soft-soled shoes squeaking. Madison Martinez, she called out. The doctors are ready to speak with you about your sister. My name, spoken aloud, shattered the fragile shield of my anonymity. Franco D'Amico's head snapped in my direction. His cold, dark eyes locked onto mine, and in that instant, I felt my soul being stripped bare. There was no flicker of surprise in his gaze, only a dawning, terrifying recognition. He looked from my face to the phone still clutched in my hand, the red recording light a tiny, damning beacon in the dim corridor. The younger man followed his gaze, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. A slow, predatory smile spread across his face. He took a step toward me. "Boss?" he murmured, his voice a low growl. "I think this young lady just heard something she shouldn't have." Franco D'Amico didn't answer. He simply watched me, his expression unreadable, as the world I knew fractured and fell away, leaving me standing on the edge of an abyss. The fate of a stranger, my sister's life, and my own future had just become irrevocably entangled with the city's most dangerous man. And my phone held the proof that could get us all killed. The seconds stretched into an eternity, thick with unspoken threats. The nurse, oblivious to the lethal tension in the air, gave me a compassionate smile. "This way, dear. The doctors are in the consultation room." She gestured down the hall, away from the two men who now stood between me and my sister's fate. My mind raced, a frantic scramble for an escape route that didn't exist. Do I run? Do I scream? Do I pretend I heard nothing? Franco D'Amico's gaze held me pinned, a silent command that rooted my feet to the floor. With a will of its own, my thumb finally found the stop button, and I slid the phone into the deep pocket of my scrubs, the movement feeling clumsy and agonizingly slow. "Go," Franco said, his voice a low, quiet rumble. It wasn't directed at me. It was a dismissal, an order to the nurse. She blinked, confused by his authority, but something in his tone brooked no argument. She gave me a hesitant look before scurrying away, her squeaking shoes a fading echo of the normal world I had just lost. Now, it was just the three of us in the sterile, silent corridor. I have to go," I stammered, my voice barely a whisper. "My sister—" "Your sister, Sofia Martinez," Franco interrupted, his voice smooth as polished marble. "A sophomore at Columbia, majoring in art history. An unfortunate victim of a hit-and-run this evening. The driver was intoxicated. He's already in custody." Each word was a precisely delivered blow, designed to tell me one thing. I know everything. He hadn't just overheard my name. He had my entire life story at his fingertips. The casual, almost sympathetic delivery of the information was more terrifying than any overt threat. It was a demonstration of absolute power, of a reach so vast it could pluck details from the city's ether in mere moments. The younger man, whom I now knew was named Victor, took a menacing step forward. "Give me the phone." It was a raw, guttural command. "I didn't hear anything," I lied, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "I was recording a message for my uncle, that's all." Victor let out a short, brutal laugh. "A message? Your face was as white as these walls. You heard every word." He lunged for my pocket, but Franco's arm shot out, blocking his path with effortless strength. The movement was so fast, so fluid, it was almost imperceptible. "Patience, Victor," Franco murmured, his eyes never leaving mine. "Miss Martinez is in a delicate situation. We should be sensitive to that." The mock courtesy was a chilling counterpoint to the violence simmering just beneath the surface. He then turned his full attention to me. "Your uncle, Benjamin Martinez, a retired police detective, resides in upstate New York. Hasn't spoken to you or your sister in nearly 2 years, not since you refused his offer to move out of the city after your parents' death." My breath hitched. The chasm between my world and his felt impossibly wide. He knew our family's private pains, our secret fractures. "My sister's surgery," I pleaded, latching onto the only thought that mattered. "I need to hear what the doctors have to say." "Of course," Franco said, his expression softening with a disarming empathy that felt more dangerous than his anger. "Family is the only thing that matters. Victor will wait for you here. After you've spoken with the surgeons, you and I will have a conversation. About what you heard, and about what happens next." It was not a request. It was a decree. The consultation felt like a dream, the doctor's words a muffled drone in the background. Surgery was a success. Long road to recovery. Lucky to be alive. I nodded and asked the right questions, my nurse's training on autopilot. But my mind was back in the corridor with the two men who held my life in their hands. Sophia was alive. She was stable. That was the anchor in my swirling sea of terror. When I returned, Victor was leaning against the wall, arms crossed, his impatience a palpable aura. Franco was gone. "Where is he?" I asked, my voice trembling. "He had business to attend to. You're with me now," Victor said, grabbing my arm in a grip of steel. His touch was rough, proprietary. "We're going for a ride." He half-dragged me toward a service elevator at the end of a deserted wing of the hospital. The descent was silent and terrifying. We emerged in a subterranean parking garage, the air thick with the smell of damp concrete and exhaust fumes. A black, obscenely luxurious sedan was waiting, its engine purring like a caged panther. The drive was a blur of rain-streaked city lights. We sped through the deserted streets of Manhattan, the storm washing the city clean, though I felt irrevocably stained by the night's events. We arrived at a converted textile factory from the 1940s in a part of the city I didn't recognize, all exposed brick and dark, looming windows. It was a fortress disguised as industrial chic. Victor led me to a vast, cavernous office on the top floor. The space was a study in brutalist minimalism. Polished concrete floors, a massive desk made from a single slab of dark wood, and a wall of windows that looked out over the churning black waters of the river. And there, sitting behind the desk, as if he were a king on his throne, was Franco D'Amico. The storm outside seemed to be a reflection of the tempestuous power he commanded within these walls. "Miss Martinez," he said, his voice echoing slightly in the large room. "Thank you for joining me. Please sit." He gestured to a single, stark leather chair placed before his desk. It felt less like a seat and more like an interrogation chair. I remained standing, my fears slowly being replaced by a spark of defiance. "What do you want from me?" Franco's lips curved into that ghost of a smile. It held no warmth, only a chilling amusement. "Let's start with the truth. You recorded my conversation. It was an accident. And yet you haven't deleted it," he countered smoothly, steepling his fingers, "which tells me you are either very foolish or you understand that the recording is the only thing keeping you alive right now." A very dangerous insurance policy. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle in the silent room. "The question is, what is the premium on such a policy?" "I don't want anything," I insisted. "I want to walk out of here, go back to my sister, and forget any of this ever happened." "Ignorance is a luxury you can no longer afford, Madison," he said. "The use of my first name a deliberate, intimate violation. You have stepped into my world. The only way out is through me." He stood and walked around the desk, his movements fluid and predatory. He stopped directly in front of me, so close I could feel the heat radiating from his body. He was taller than I'd realized, his presence all-consuming. "You are a nurse. You save lives. A noble profession," he murmured, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "I, on the other hand, am in the business of managing consequences, and you, Madison, have become a very significant consequence." He reached out, and for a terrifying second, I thought he was going to strike me. Instead, his fingers gently brushed a stray strand of hair from my face. The touch was electric, a shocking jolt of warmth against my cold skin. It was a gesture of terrifying intimacy, a claim. "So here is my proposal," he continued, his eyes locked on mine. "You will give me the recording. In return, I will personally guarantee your sister's complete medical care. The best surgeons, the best physical therapists, a full recovery with no expense spared. I will also ensure your own safety. You will be under my protection and under my employ." "Employ?" I breathed, the word getting stuck in my throat. "Yes. You are now a consultant for my family's foundation. The pay will be more than enough to ensure you and Sophia live comfortably for the rest of your lives." He smiled that chilling smile again. "All you have to do is give me the recording, and your absolute loyalty." It was a gilded cage, an offer of salvation wrapped in the chains of servitude. He was offering to save Sophia, the one thing I cared about most in the world, but the price was my freedom, my soul. "And if I say no?" I asked, my voice a fragile thread. Franco's expression hardened, the brief flicker of warmth vanishing completely. replaced by the cold, ruthless calculus of the man who ran the city's shadows. "If you say no," he said softly, "then you are not an asset. You are a threat. And my family has a very specific and permanent way of dealing with threats. As does your uncle, I imagine. It would be a shame if his past cases were to be re-examined. A man can make many enemies over a long career in law enforcement." The threat was multi-layered, a hydra of blackmail aimed not only at me and Sophia, but at the last piece of our broken family. I was trapped, utterly and completely. He had considered every angle, every weakness, every love I held dear, and turned it into a weapon against me. The first deposit appeared in my new, anonymously opened bank account exactly 72 hours later. The sum was staggering, more money than I had ever seen in one place. It was followed by an email from a prestigious private clinic detailing a comprehensive, fully funded recovery plan for Sophia, complete with the names of the city's top neurological and orthopedic surgeons. Franco D'Amico was a man of his word. He had bought my sister's health, and in doing so, had purchased my soul. My life split into two irreconcilable halves. By day, I was Madison Martinez, the dedicated pediatric nurse, holding the hands of sick children and reassuring terrified parents. I moved through the hospital's bright, sterile halls, a ghost of my former self. The constant, low-grade hum of fear, a permanent soundtrack beneath my daily routines. I visited Sophia, who was slowly, miraculously beginning her long journey back to consciousness, her hospital room filled with extravagant bouquets of flowers from an anonymous benefactor. But by night, I was a prisoner in a gilded cage. I was now a philanthropic consultant for the D'Amico Foundation, a legitimate front that washed dirty money clean through donations to art galleries, hospitals, and community centers. My job was a farce, a title on a piece of paper that served only to justify the blood money flowing into my account. My handler was Victor. He seemed to relish the task, his sneering contempt a constant reminder of my position. He would pick me up in that same black sedan and take me to opulent restaurants, charity galas, and private meetings, where I was expected to sit silently, a pretty, compliant accessory on Franco's arm. I was a symbol of his reach, a tamed thing to be displayed. The fear was a living entity, a cold knot in my stomach that never loosened. But beneath the fear, something else was taking root, a defiant, burning anger. I hated these people. I hated their casual cruelty, their obscene wealth built on the suffering of others. Most of all, I hated Franco D'Amico. I hated him for his suffocating control, for his chilling intelligence, and for the disarming, dangerous charm he wielded like a weapon. I began to fight back in the only ways I could. Small rebellions. I started a journal, documenting everything I saw, every name I heard, every whispered conversation about shipping routes and union problems. It was a reckless, suicidal act, but it was mine. It was the one part of my life he couldn't control. I hid the small notebook in a loose floorboard beneath my bed, a tiny landmine of truth in a world of lies. One evening, about a month into my servitude, Victor took me to a high-stakes poker game in a private suite at a 5-star hotel. The air was thick with cigar smoke and the scent of expensive whiskey. Franco was there, holding court at the head of the table, a king surrounded by his vassals, judges, city councilmen, union bosses. They gambled with fortunes, their laughter loud and careless. I was seated on a plush sofa away from the table, a silent observer. A man I didn't recognize, reeking of cheap cologne and cheaper arrogance, approached me. He was one of the union bosses, his face florid with alcohol. "You're Franco's new girl, huh?" he slurred, looking me up and down like a piece of meat. "Pretty little thing. He must be treating you well." He reached out and stroked my arm, his touch slimy and possessive. Ice shot through my veins. I recoiled, pulling my arm away. "Don't touch me." His eyes hardened. "Feisty, I like that." He grabbed my wrist, his grip surprisingly strong. "Don't get too comfortable, sweetheart. Girls like you are disposable." Before I could react, a blur of motion exploded from the poker table. Franco was on his feet and across the room in a heartbeat. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The look in his eyes was enough to freeze the blood. He seized the union boss by the collar, his knuckles white. Her name is Madison, he said, his voice a low, lethal whisper that cut through the sudden, dead silence of the room. And you will never lay a hand on her again. Do you understand me? The man's arrogant smirk vanished, replaced by stark, primal fear. He nodded frantically, his face pale. Franco held his gaze for a moment longer before shoving him backward. The man stumbled, regained his footing, and practically fled the room without a backward glance. The poker game was over. The atmosphere was ruined, charged with the ozone of Franco's violent, protective rage. He turned to me, his dark eyes scanning my face, searching for any sign of fear. Are you all right? I nodded, unable to speak, my wrist throbbing where the man had grabbed me. It was a confusing, dizzying moment. He was a monster, a purveyor of violence and fear, but in that instant he had also been my protector. The terrifying force of his anger had been unleashed not at me, but for me. It was a dangerous, intoxicating feeling. The drive back to my apartment was silent. When we arrived, he walked me to my door. He won't bother you again, Franco said, his voice still holding an edge of steel. Because you threatened him, I shot back, my anger suddenly finding its voice. That's how you solve everything, isn't it? With violence and fear? His expression hardened. In my world, it is the only language some people understand. I did what was necessary to protect what is mine. I am not yours, I spat, the words a raw protest against the invisible chains that bound me to him. He stepped closer, backing me against my own front door, his body caging me in. Aren't you? He murmured, his gaze dropping to my lips. I pay for your sister's life. I pay for your home. I keep you safe from a world that would chew you up and spit you out. You live and breathe because I allow it. Make no mistake, Madison. You are mine. His intensity was overwhelming, a gravitational pull that was impossible to resist. He leaned in, and for a heart-stopping moment, I thought he was going to kiss me. I could feel the warmth of his breath, smell the faint scent of whiskey, and something else, something uniquely him. My heart hammered against my ribs, a chaotic mix of fear and a treacherous, unwelcome flicker of anticipation. But he pulled back at the last second, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. Get some rest, Madison, he said, his voice once again a mask of cool control. Victor will pick you up at 7 for the fundraiser tomorrow night. He turned and walked away, leaving me trembling in the hallway. My hand pressed to my lips. I hated him. I hated everything he stood for. But a terrifying, insidious part of me was beginning to wonder what it would have felt like if he hadn't pulled away. The next few months settled into a tense, dangerous rhythm. I continued my double life, my secret journal growing thicker with every passing day. My hatred for Franco was a constant burning flame, but it was now complicated by other, more confusing emotions. I saw glimpses of a man beneath the monster, a man who spoke about classic literature with surprising passion, who treated his aging housekeeper with a gentle respect, who seemed to carry the weight of his inherited empire with a profound, weary loneliness. These moments were rare and fleeting, but they chipped away at the solid walls of my animosity, leaving me unsettled and conflicted. Sophia was getting better. She was awake, talking, and had started the grueling process of physical therapy. The doctors called her recovery miraculous. I called it a deal with the devil. Every time I looked at her, saw the light returning to her eyes, I felt a fresh wave of guilt and gratitude, a toxic cocktail that left me perpetually off balance. She knew nothing of my arrangement, believing only in the luck of an anonymous benefactor. The fundraiser was for a new pediatric wing at a city hospital, one of the D'Amico Foundation's flagship projects. I stood in a glittering ballroom, wearing a borrowed designer gown that felt like a costume, a glass of champagne in my hand. I watched Franco move through the crowd of the city's elite, a shark in a sea of well-dressed fish. He was charming, charismatic, effortlessly commanding the attention of everyone in the room. It was there that I saw him, Detective Russo, a name from a past I had tried to bury. He had been my father's partner, a man I had once looked up to as an uncle. After my parents' death, he had been the one to gently close the book on their case, calling it a tragic, unavoidable accident. Seeing him here, schmoozing with the very people my father had dedicated his life to putting away, felt like a betrayal. Our eyes met across the crowded room, a A flicker of recognition, then panic, crossed his face. He tried to turn away, but it was too late. I excused myself and moved toward him, my heart pounding a furious rhythm. "Detective Russo," I said, my voice cold. "Fancy seeing you here." He paled. "Madison, what a surprise. I didn't know you were involved with this." He gestured vaguely at the opulent surroundings. "There's a lot you don't know," I said, my gaze sharp. "I was hoping to ask you about my parents' case. I was young then. I never got the full details." "There's nothing to tell," he said quickly, his eyes darting around nervously. "It was a straightforward hit and run, tragic, but simple." "Was it?" I pressed, a sudden cold suspicion dawning. "Because the man who pays for this entire gala, the man whose protection I am currently under, has a knack for making things that are not accidents look like accidents." Russo's composure shattered. "You need to walk away, Madison," he hissed, his voice a low, urgent whisper. "You have no idea what you're getting into. Forget about your parents, forget about this world. Just take the money and stay quiet." His fear was a confirmation. It was a blaring siren in the back of my mind. My parents' death wasn't a random accident. It was connected to this world, to him. Before I could demand more answers, Franco was at my side, his hand resting possessively on the small of my back. His presence was a shield, but also a cage. "Is there a problem here, Madison?" he asked. His voice deceptively mild, but his eyes were fixed on Russo, cold and hard as diamonds. "No problem at all," Russo stammered, sweating now. "Just catching up with an old family friend. It was good to see you, Madison." He practically fled into the crowd. Franco's gaze followed him for a moment before turning back to me. "An old family friend?" he asked, one eyebrow raised. "He was my father's partner," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "He investigated my parents' death." Franco studied my face, his expression unreadable. "And what did he have to say about it?" "He told me to forget about it." A long, tense silence stretched between us. The music and laughter of the gala faded into a distant buzz. "Some things," Franco said finally, his voice low, "are better left buried." The cold dread that washed over me was absolute. He knew. Whatever secret was buried with my parents, Franco D'Amico knew what it was, and he had no intention of letting me uncover it. That night, my small act of rebellion escalated. My secret journal was no longer enough. I needed answers. I used the access my position gave me, the trust I had carefully, reluctantly built. I began to dig. I started with the D'Amico Foundation's archives, searching for any connection, any name, any project that linked back to the year my parents died. It took me weeks. Weeks of feigning compliance while my mind worked feverishly, connecting dots, following faint, long-dead trails. And then I found it, buried deep in the financials of a defunct construction subsidiary, a series of large, untraceable payments made to a shell corporation, payments authorized by Franco's father, the old Don, just days before my parents' car went off the bridge. And the name of the project they were tied to, the very same waterfront development that had been discussed in the hushed, deadly conversation I had recorded in that hospital corridor. My father hadn't been a simple detective. He had been investigating the D'Amico family, and he had gotten too close. The revelation was a physical blow. It knocked the air from my lungs and left me gasping. For 5 years, I had mourned an accident. Now, I had to mourn a murder. And the man who held my life in his hands, the man whose touch I was beginning to crave against my will, was the son of the man who had ordered my parents' execution. My hatred, which had become so complicated and confused, returned with the force of a tidal wave. It was pure now, white-hot and absolute. I looked at the evidence I had uncovered, the damning thread that connected my past to my present. I finally had a weapon, a real one. Not just a recording, but a motive. A truth that could burn Franco D'Amico's entire empire to the ground. The question was, would I be willing to get burned along with it? The knowledge was a poison, seeping into every interaction I had with Franco. Every polite inquiry about my day, every casual touch, every moment of his focused, intense attention now felt like a grotesque charade. I was consorting with the son of my parents' murderer. The gilded cage had become a tomb, and I was suffocating. My secret investigation had given me a new, dangerous purpose. I was no longer just a victim, I was an avenger. I copied the files, the incriminating financial records, and hid them with my journal, my arsenal of truth growing day by day. My plan was simple and insane. I would gather enough evidence to destroy him, not just for the witness he had targeted, but for the parents he had stolen from me. I would find a way to get it to the authorities, the real ones, not compromised cops like Russo, and then I would disappear. But the closer I got to my goal, the more I saw. I saw the crushing weight of the legacy Franco carried. I saw him dealing with the brutal, violent men who served under him. His authority, the only thing holding back a tide of pure chaos. I saw him make decisions that were ruthless, but in the twisted logic of his world, they were also a form of justice. He was a monster, but he was a monster holding back even greater monsters. The black and white clarity of my hatred began to blur at the edges, turning into a murky, confusing gray. The tipping point came on a cold, rain-swept Tuesday. I was with Franco at a meeting in one of his warehouses on the docks. A shipment had gone missing, and one of his lieutenants, a man named Marco, was on his knees, pleading for his life. He had a gambling problem, debts to a rival family. He had sold them information. He had betrayed the family. "Please, Franco," Marco wept, his face a mess of tears and terror. "My wife, my kids. I made a mistake. I can fix it." I expected Franco to be cold, ruthless. I expected a quiet nod to Victor, followed by a gunshot. It was the law of his world. Instead, he looked at Marco with a profound, weary sadness. "You have a son, Marco," Franco said, his voice quiet but resonant in the cavernous warehouse. "He is 7 years old. He wants to be a firefighter when he grows up." He knew the details, just as he had known the details of my life. "You have a daughter who just started ballet. You betrayed us. You put everyone in this room, everyone in our family, at risk. For what, a losing hand at a card table?" He crouched down in front of Marco, his gaze holding the terrified man's. "The law of our family is clear. Betrayal is answered with death. That is the price." Marco let out a sob, a broken, animal sound. I closed my eyes, bracing for the inevitable. "But your son should not have to pay the price for his father's weakness," Franco continued, his voice softening almost imperceptibly. "Your daughter should not have to grow up without a father because he was a fool." He stood up and looked at his men, his voice ringing with authority. "Marco is exiled. He will leave the city tonight with his family. He will never return. He will never contact anyone from this life again. If I ever see his face or hear his name, I will kill him myself. But his children will have their father. Do you all understand?" There were murmurs of shock and dissent. This was an unprecedented act of mercy, a violation of their brutal code. "I asked," Franco said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, "if you understand." A chorus of "Yes, boss," answered him. He had spared a man's life. He had broken his own ruthless rules for the sake of 2 innocent children. In that moment, the monster I had built up in my mind, the son of my parents' killer, became something else entirely. He became a man, a flawed, dangerous, and impossibly complicated man. And my heart, against all reason, ached for him. I was so lost in the turmoil of my own emotions that I didn't see the threat until it was too late. The internal politics of the D'Amico family were a venomous snake pit I had only just begun to understand. Victor, Franco's younger cousin, saw his mercy as weakness. He saw my growing influence over Franco as a threat to his own position as heir apparent. He began to conspire. He wasn't alone. A woman named Isabella, a sharp, ambitious lawyer who had been Franco's confidant for years, saw me as an obstacle to be removed. She had her own designs on the throne at Franco's side, and I was in her way. They found their weapon in my past. They must have been watching me, digging into my life just as I had been digging into theirs. They discovered my connection to Detective Russo. They found proof of my secret meetings, my desperate attempts to find information about my parents. They twisted it, they framed it. They built a case against me, not of a grieving daughter seeking answers, but of a federal informant, a rat, feeding information to the feds in exchange for protection. They gathered their evidence, photographs of me talking to Russo, phone records, fabricated reports, and they prepared to strike. The confrontation happened in the same cold, imposing boardroom where I had first been brought into this world. Franco's inner circle was assembled, the air thick with tension. Isabella laid out the evidence with cold, legal precision. Victor stood by the window, a predatory smirk on his face. "She has been meeting with a known police contact," Isabella announced, her voice ringing with false regret. "A detective who has a history with the D'Amico family. We have reason to believe she is a federal informant, trading our secrets for her own immunity." All eyes turned to me. I felt the weight of their suspicion, their hatred. I looked at Franco, my heart pleading with him to see the truth. "It's not true," I said, my voice shaking. "Russo was my father's partner. I was asking him about my parents' death, that's all." "Your parents' death?" Victor scoffed. "Or were you feeding him information about the waterfront deal? The same deal your father was investigating before his accident?" The blood drained from my face. They knew I knew. This wasn't just an accusation, it was a checkmate. They had backed me into a corner from which there was no escape. "Franco, she is a liability," Isabella urged, her voice smooth as silk. "Your feelings for her are clouding your judgment. The family must be protected. She has to be eliminated." I looked at Franco, my life hanging on his next words. I saw the conflict in his eyes, the battle between the cold logic of the Don and the feelings of the man. He was trapped, just as I was. To protect me would be to declare war on his own family, to show a weakness that his enemies would exploit. To condemn me would be to kill the one person who had seen the man behind the monster. Victor, sensing Franco's hesitation, decided to force the issue. He moved toward me, his intent a brutal, tangible thing. "If you won't do what's necessary, Franco, then I will." "Victor?" "No," Franco commanded, his voice a low growl. But Victor ignored him. He grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my flesh like talons. "Your time is up, little nurse," he snarled. Instinct took over. The years of grief, the burning rage, the suffocating fear, it all coalesced into a single defiant act. I drove my knee into his groin with all my might. He grunted in pain and surprise, his grip loosening for a fraction of a second. It was all I needed. I broke free, but there was nowhere to run. Victor recovered, his face a mask of pure fury. He lunged at me again, his hand raised, and then the world exploded in a crack of sound that was deafeningly final. It wasn't Franco who had fired. It was Marco, the man whose life Franco had spared. He stood in the doorway of the boardroom, a smoking gun in his hand, his face a mask of grim, resolute loyalty. Victor crumpled to the floor, a look of stunned disbelief on his face, a dark stain spreading across his expensive suit. The boardroom was plunged into a stunned silence. Marco looked not at the body on the floor, but at Franco. "A life for a life, boss," he said quietly. "My family is safe because of you. Now yours is too." He placed the gun on the table and walked away, disappearing back into the shadows from which he had come. He had repaid his debt. Franco stared at the chaos, at Victor's body, at Isabella's shocked and terrified face. The coup had failed. His mercy had, in the end, been his greatest strength. He crossed the room to me, ignoring everyone else, and pulled me into his arms. I collapsed against him, the adrenaline and terror finally giving way to shuddering sobs. He held me tight, his hand stroking my hair. "It's over, Madison," he whispered into my hair. "It's over, you're safe." But I knew it wasn't over. We had won this battle, but the war was just beginning, and the truth about my parents still lay between us, a sleeping dragon that was destined to wake. The aftermath of Victor's failed coup was swift and brutal. In the cold, unforgiving world of the D'Amico family, there was no room for sentiment when it came to traitors. Isabella, stripped of her power and influence, simply vanished. No one asked where she went. No one dared to. The message was clear. Loyalty to Franco was absolute. Mercy was a rare gift, not a right, and betrayal was a debt that would always be paid in full. The violence of that day should have driven me away. It should have been the final, horrifying proof that I could never belong in this world. But instead, it bound me closer to Franco. In the crucible of that bloody boardroom, our relationship was forged into something new, something stronger. He had been willing to risk a civil war within his own family to protect me. And Marco's shocking act of loyalty, a direct result of Franco's earlier mercy, had proven that there was more to his rule than just fear. There was a fierce, almost feudal sense of honor at play, a code I was only just beginning to understand. Our nights became a sanctuary from the dangers of the day. He would come back to me, the scent of the city and the weight of his world still clinging to him, and in the darkness of my small apartment, we would find a fragile peace. He never spoke of the violence, and I never asked. We existed in a silent, unspoken understanding. But the love that grew between us was a dangerous, tender flower, pushing its way through the cracks of a concrete reality. It was a love born of shared trauma and a profound magnetic pull that neither of us could deny. His touch was no longer a threat, but a comfort. His presence, once a source of terror, was now the only thing that made me feel safe. I was falling in love with him, and the knowledge was both a solace and a torment. How could I love the son of the man who had destroyed my family? The secret of my parents' murder was a constant, aching presence in my heart. The evidence I had collected, the files, the journal, felt like a physical weight, hidden away in the floorboards beneath my bed. Every time he kissed me, every time he held me, the guilt was a bitter taste in my mouth. I was betraying my parents' memory by loving him, but I knew, with a certainty that terrified me, that I would be betraying my own heart if I left him. I decided I had to know the whole truth, not just the cold facts from the financial records, but the story behind them. I had to hear it from him. One night, as we lay tangled in my sheets, the city lights a distant, glittering tapestry outside my window, I found the courage to ask. "Franco," I whispered into the darkness, my voice barely audible, "I need you to tell me about my father." His body went still. The easy, relaxed intimacy between us vanished, replaced by a sudden, tense silence. I could feel his heart beating a slow, heavy rhythm against my back. "What about him?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. "I know he was investigating your father," I said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I know it was about the waterfront development deal, and I know his death wasn't an accident." He didn't deny it. He simply lay there, the silence stretching between us, thick with 5 years of buried secrets. When he finally spoke, his voice was raw, filled with a pain that seemed ancient. "Your father was a good man, Madison," he said quietly. "He was an honest cop in a city that was drowning in corruption. He got too close. He found out about the bribes, the kickbacks, the violence that was required to make a project of that magnitude happen. So your father had him killed," I stated, the words flat and dead. He rolled over to face me, his eyes dark and haunted in the dim light. "Yes." The simple, unadorned confirmation was more devastating than any lie would have been. I squeezed my eyes shut, the tears I had held back for so long finally breaking free, hot and silent against my temples. "My father, Franco continued, his voice hoarse, was a man from a different era. He believed that family was the only thing that mattered, and that any threat to the family had to be eliminated, without mercy. Your father was a threat. And so he was eliminated." He reached out and gently wiped a tear from my cheek with his thumb. "I was 22 when it happened, Madison. I was away at university. I knew what my father did, but I kept my distance. I told myself it wasn't my world. When I found out what he had done to your parents, it was the first time I truly understood the monster he was. I confronted him. We had a terrible fight. I told him he had crossed a line, that he had murdered an innocent man and a woman who had done nothing wrong. He told me that innocence was a luxury the D'Amico family could not afford." He took a deep, shuddering breath. "I never spoke to him again after that day. He died 2 years later. And I inherited the empire he built on the blood of good men like your father." He looked at me, his soul stripped bare in the darkness. "There is not a day that goes by that I do not think about what he did. There is not a day that I do not feel the weight of his sins. That is the truth, Madison. And it is the reason why, from the moment I saw you in that hospital corridor, I knew I could not let any harm come to you. It was a debt that I can never fully repay." The confession was a cataclysm. It shattered the last of my hatred, leaving behind a raw, aching landscape of shared grief. He was not his father. He was a man trapped by his father's sins. A man trying to find a measure of honor in a dishonorable world. "Why didn't you tell me?" I whispered, my voice thick with tears. "How could I?" he asked. his voice filled with a terrible sadness. How could I tell the woman I was falling in love with that my father was responsible for the greatest pain of her life? I was a coward. I chose to keep you safe and close, and I prayed the past would stay buried. But the past was never truly buried, and as we lay there, two broken souls clinging to each other in the darkness, we both knew that the dragon was finally awake. The truth was out, a dangerous, unpredictable force that could either weld us together forever or tear us apart for good. The confession hung in the air between us, a fragile, shimmering thing, both a poison and an antidote. For days we existed in a strange limbo, a quiet, somber space where the truth of our shared history was a third presence in the room. The love between us didn't vanish. Instead, it deepened, taking on a darker, more complex hue. It was a love that acknowledged the abyss that had separated our families. A love that chose to exist despite the ghosts. We were two solitary islands that had, against all odds, found a way to form an archipelago, connected by a bridge of shared pain and a desperate, defiant hope for the future. But the waters around us were not calm. The past, now unearthed, was not content to remain a quiet memory. It was a living entity, and it had teeth. The first tremor came in the form of a single, long-stemmed white lily left on the doorstep of my apartment. There was no note, no card, just the funereal flower. Its scent thick and cloying. In the language of Franco's world, it was a message, a threat. White lilies were for the dead. Franco's reaction was immediate and terrifying. His calm, controlled demeanor shattered, replaced by a cold, primal fury. He swept his entire security team, his voice like cracking ice as he demanded answers. Who had breached the perimeter? Who had gotten close enough to leave a message at my door? The failure was unacceptable. That night, I didn't stay in my apartment. He took me to his penthouse, a fortress of glass and steel high above the city. It was the first time I had been back since the night of the charity gala. The night I had first confronted the ghost of my father. Now it didn't feel like a cage, but a sanctuary. Who would do this, Franco? I asked, as he stood by the panoramic windows, staring down at the city lights, his body a tense silhouette against the glittering skyline. It could be anyone, he said, his voice a low growl. An old rival, someone loyal to Victor looking for revenge. The Castellano family has been quiet for too long. They may see this as an opportunity to test my strength. But I knew, with a chilling certainty, that it was not random. The timing was too precise. The threat had appeared only after the truth about my parents had been spoken aloud between us. Someone else knew our secret. Someone was using my past as a weapon against him. The second tremor was more direct. A package arrived for me at the hospital. It was a small, velvet-lined box. Inside, nestled on a bed of satin, was a single, tarnished silver locket, my mother's locket, the one she was wearing the night she died, the one the police had told me was lost in the wreckage. My blood ran cold. I opened it with trembling fingers. Inside, the tiny photos of my parents were gone. In their place was a minuscule, folded piece of newspaper, yellowed with age. It was a headline from a small local paper, dated the week after their deaths. It read, "Crusading detective's death shuts down mob probe." It was proof. A public acknowledgement of the secret I had only just learned. Whoever sent this wasn't just threatening me. They were showing me they had the power to expose everything. They could destroy Franco's carefully maintained public image, unravel his empire, and send us both to prison or to an early grave. Attached to the locket was a tiny engraved metal tag. On it were a date, a time, and a location. Pier 47, midnight, tomorrow. And a single chilling sentence. Come alone or your sister's miracle recovery comes to an end. The threat was absolute. They had my mother's locket, which meant they had access to the cold case files, access that could only come from a mole deep within the police department. And they were threatening Sophia. They were using my deepest love and my greatest weakness against me. I didn't tell Franco. How could I? He would lock me away, surround me with an army of men, and go to that pier himself, walking straight into a trap. They were using me as bait, and I knew with a gut-wrenching certainty that he would not hesitate to sacrifice himself to save me and my sister. I couldn't let that happen. This was my battle, my parents, my past. For the first time since I had stumbled into this world, I didn't feel like a victim. I felt a cold, hard resolve solidifying in my soul. I was no longer just a nurse. I was the daughter of a murdered detective, and I would not let them use my family to destroy the man I loved. I spent the next 24 hours in a fever of planning. I used the knowledge I had gleaned from months at Franco's side, the understanding of tactics, of loyalty, of the brutal calculus of his world. I found the secret journal and the files I had hidden, my own personal arsenal, and I made a call, not to the police, not to Franco, but to the one man who owed Franco a debt of life. "Marco," I said, when his voice answered on the untraceable burner phone I had acquired. "It's Madison. I need your help." The next night, under a sky the color of a fresh bruise, I drove to the docks. The air was thick with the smell of salt, diesel, and decay. Pier 47 was a skeletal finger of rotting wood pointing out into the black, churning water of the river. It was deserted, a graveyard of forgotten cargo and rusted machinery. I was not alone. I could feel them, watching from the shadows. I walked to the end of the pier, the wind whipping my hair around my face. My mother's locket cold against my skin. A figure emerged from the darkness of a derelict warehouse. It was not a Castellano thug, not a vengeful loyalist of Victor's. It was Detective Russo, my father's partner. "Madison," he said, his voice filled with a weary, desperate sadness. "You shouldn't have come." "You sent the locket," I said, my voice steady despite the frantic beating of my heart. "You're threatening my sister. Why?" "I have no choice," he rasped, his face pale and slick with sweat in the dim moonlight. "They have my son Madison, the Castellanos. They took him. They said they would kill him unless I delivered you to them." The betrayal was so profound, so complete, it almost buckled my knees. The man who was supposed to be a protector, a symbol of the law my father had died for, had sold me out to save his own family. "And my parents?" I asked, my voice dropping to a whisper. "Were you a part of that too?" A sob broke from his lips. "I tried to warn him, Maddie," I told him to back off. "But he was like you, stubborn, honorable. He wouldn't listen. After he was gone, the D'Amicos, the old Don, he put me on his payroll. He owned me. I buried the evidence to protect myself, to protect my family." From the shadows behind him, more figures emerged. At their head was a man with cold, dead eyes and a cruel slash of a mouth. Ricardo Castellano, the rival Franco had warned me about. "Such a touching reunion," Castellano said, his voice a mocking sneer. "The traitorous cop and the daughter of the man he let die. And the bait that will finally bring the great Franco D'Amico to his knees." He gestured to his men, who moved to flank me, their intentions clear. "My father rotted in a prison cell because of the D'Amicos. Tonight, their reign ends, and it begins with you." I clutched the locket in my hand, the cold metal a small, hard point of reality in a nightmare. I had walked into the trap, but I had not come unprepared. "You're wrong," I said, my voice ringing out with a strength I didn't know I possessed. "It doesn't begin with me. It ends with you." And from the darkness all around us, from the rooftops of the warehouses, from the rusted hulls of the derelict ships, and from the Blackwater itself, figures began to rise, silent, armed, and utterly loyal. At their head, stepping out of the deepest shadow, was Franco D'Amico. He was not alone. Beside him stood Marco, his face grim and determined. I had not been the only one to make a call. Franco's mercy had bought him more than just one man's loyalty. It had bought him an army that would follow him into hell. Castellano's face contorted in a mask of rage and disbelief. He had planned an ambush, a simple kidnapping. He had not expected a war. Franco's eyes found mine across the pier. They were filled with a cold puanca, lethal fury directed at my captors. But when they looked at me, there was also a raw, heart-stopping terror. The terror of a man who was about to lose the only thing in the world he truly cared about. "Let her go, Castellano!" Franco's voice boomed across the pier, the voice of a king commanding his battlefield. "Let her go now, and I might let you live to see the sunrise." Castellano let out a harsh laugh and pressed the cold barrel of a gun to my temple. "You are not in a position to make demands, D'Amico. You will lay down your arms and surrender to me, or your queen dies first." The stalemate was absolute. 100 guns were aimed, 100 fingers on 100 triggers. The slightest movement, the slightest miscalculation, and this pier would become a slaughterhouse. And I was standing at the very center of it all. The world narrowed to the cold, hard circle of the gun barrel against my temple, and the unwavering intensity of Franco's gaze across the pier. Castellano's arm was a band of steel around my neck, his breath hot and foul against my ear. He smelled of fear and stale bravado. He thought he held all the cards. He was wrong. "You have 5 seconds to drop your weapons, D'Amico," Castellano snarled, his voice tight with a rising panic as he took in the sheer number of armed men that had materialized from the ether. 5. 4. I met Franco's eyes. In them, I saw not the cold calculation of a dawn, but the raw agony of a man. This was the scenario he had feared most, the one I had promised I would never put him in. But in that silent, desperate communication, I tried to tell him what he had taught me. There is always a choice. 3. My training as a nurse, the long hours in the ER where life and death were decided in a fraction of a second, took over. I knew anatomy. I knew the body's weaknesses. While Castellano's attention was locked on Franco, my hand, which he thought was limp at my side, was slowly, deliberately moving. My fingers found the soft, vulnerable spot just below his rib cage. 2. "Don't do it, Franco," I screamed, a deliberate distraction. The plea was for him, but the action was for me. I drove my thumb, hardened by years of medical practice, into the nerve cluster with all my strength. Castellano roared in pain and surprise, his body arching involuntarily. His grip on me loosened for a nanosecond. It was the only opening I would get. I dropped, tucking my body into a ball and rolling away from him, the rough, splintered wood of the pier scraping my skin. The world erupted into a deafening symphony of gunfire. It was not the chaotic spray of a street fight. It was the disciplined, controlled fire of Franco's men. They moved with a lethal grace, a perfectly orchestrated ballet of death. Castellano's thugs, caught completely by surprise, were cut down before they could even properly aim. I scrambled behind a stack of rotting crates, my heart hammering against my ribs, the acrid smell of gunpowder filling the air. This was his world, raw and unfiltered, a world of brutal, efficient violence. Through a gap in the crates, I saw him. Franco was no longer the composed businessman or the tender lover. He was a force of nature, a whirlwind of controlled violence, moving through the chaos with a deadly purpose. He dispatched 2 of Castellano's men with a cold efficiency that was both terrifying and mesmerizing. He was protecting his own, eliminating a threat. He was a king defending his kingdom. The main firefight was over in less than a minute. What remained were pockets of resistance and the final personal confrontation. Castellano, his face a mask of crazed fury, was using Russo as a human shield, backing away toward a waiting speedboat at the end of the pier. "It's not over, D'Amico," he screamed, his voice hoarse. "You'll never be safe. I'll expose everything. The girl's father, the old Don's crimes. I'll burn your whole damn empire to the ground." Franco advanced on him, his steps slow and deliberate, a predator closing in on his cornered prey. "My father's sins are not mine," he said, his voice dangerously calm. "But you threatened my family. You put your hands on my wife, and for that there is no forgiveness." The word, wife, hung in the air, a shocking public declaration. In the midst of this bloody chaos, he had claimed me not just as his own, but as his partner, his equal. Russo, seeing his chance, made a desperate move. He stomped down hard on Castellano's instep and twisted, breaking free. For a moment, Castellano was exposed, his chest a clear target. But Franco didn't shoot. Instead, Russo, the disgraced cop, the traitor, seemed to find one last, buried shred of the man he used to be. He lunged forward, tackling Castellano, sending them both plunging over the edge of the pier and into the dark, churning water below. The splash was followed by a shocked silence, broken only by the lapping of the waves and the distant wail of approaching sirens. Franco's men were already moving, melting back into the shadows as quickly as they had appeared. Marco was suddenly at my side, helping me to my feet. "We have to go, Madison," he said, his voice urgent. "Now." But I couldn't move. I was watching Franco. He stood at the edge of the pier, staring down into the black water that had swallowed both his rival and the last living link to his father's crime. He looked alone, a solitary king surveying the cost of his victory. He turned and his eyes found me. He crossed the pier in a few long strides and pulled me into his arms, crushing me against him. He buried his face in my hair, and I could feel the tremors running through his powerful frame. He was not just holding me, he was holding on to me, as if I were the only thing keeping him from being swept away by the darkness. "I thought I'd lost you," he whispered, his voice raw with an emotion I had never heard from him before. It was fear. The invincible Franco D'Amico was afraid. "You didn't," I said, my voice muffled against his chest. "You'll never lose me." We stood there for a long moment, an island of stillness in the aftermath of the storm, the wail of the sirens growing closer. Marco's voice cut through the haze. "Boss, we have to move. The police will be here any second." Franco pulled back, his hands framing my face. His eyes, dark and intense, searched mine. "This life, Madison, the violence, the fear, it will never be completely gone. Are you sure this is what you want?" I looked at this man, this killer, this protector, this flawed and complicated soul who had spared a traitor for the sake of his children and risked a war for the sake of my life. I thought of my sterile, lonely existence before him, a life of quiet safety that had also been a life of quiet desperation. "There is no safety without you," I said, the truth of it resonating deep in my bones. "My home is with you, Franco, whatever that looks like." A slow smile spread across his face, a real smile, one that reached his eyes and transformed his harsh features into something breathtakingly handsome. It was the smile of a man who had fought his way through hell and found heaven on the other side. "Then let's go home," he said. Marco led us away from the pier, through a labyrinth of dark alleys to where a different, nondescript car was waiting. As we sped away, back toward the glittering, indifferent lights of Manhattan, I didn't look back. The ghosts of the past had been faced. The debts had been paid in blood and water. And for the first time, I felt like we were not running from something, but toward a future that we would build together, on our own terms, in the heart of the storm. The sunrise that followed the battle at the pier was the most beautiful I had ever seen. We watched it from the floor-to-ceiling windows of Franco's penthouse, the sky slowly bleeding from bruised purple to soft rose and brilliant gold. The city below was waking up, a million tiny lives beginning a new day, blissfully unaware of the war that had been fought in its shadows. We hadn't slept. We had spent the hours until dawn simply holding each other, the silence between us more intimate than any words could be. The violence of the night had stripped away the last of our pretenses, leaving only the raw, undeniable truth of our feelings for each other. The bodies of Castellano and Russo were recovered from the river that morning. The official police report, authored by a department now keenly aware of the D'Amico family's reach, called it a mob hit, a rival dealing with a dirty cop. The case was closed before it was ever truly opened. The system, which my father had believed in, had bent to the will of the man I loved. It was a bitter, complicated truth I was learning to accept. A week later, Sophia was discharged from the hospital. She was still in a wheelchair, her road to a full recovery long, but she was alive, and she was home. Home was now a sun-drenched apartment in a secure, doorman building, a place Franco had arranged, far from the walk-up with the faulty plumbing that we had once shared. When Franco came to visit, Sophia studied him with the perceptive, artistic eyes that saw more than most. She saw the way he looked at me, the way his hand always found mine, the quiet, protective aura he radiated. She didn't ask about the source of his wealth or the rumors that clung to his name like a second skin. She simply saw that I was happy, that for the first time in 5 years, the heavy burden of responsibility I carried seemed to have lifted. "He loves you, Maddie," she whispered to me one afternoon, as we watched him from the balcony, talking quietly on the phone, his back to us. "In a way that's bigger than life." "It's complicated, Soph," I had replied, my heart aching with the truth of her words. "Love always is," she said, with the simple, profound wisdom of someone who had stared death in the face and chosen to live. That evening, Franco took me to the rooftop garden of his penthouse. The air was cool and crisp, and the scent of night-blooming jasmine filled the air. The chaos of the city below seemed a world away. "I have been thinking," he said, his voice a low rumble in the quiet darkness, "about my father, about yours, about the legacy of violence that brought us together. He turned to face me, his expression serious, vulnerable. I have spent my entire life managing that legacy, controlling it, containing it, but I do not want to pass it on. I do not want our children to be born into a world where the answer to every problem is a gun. My breath caught in my throat. Our children, he was talking about a future, a real future, one that extended beyond surviving the next threat. I am a rich man, Madison, he continued, a wry smile touching his lips. My legitimate businesses, the ones built on steel and concrete and shrewd investments, are more profitable than the shadows my father preferred. It is time to let the shadows fade. He was talking about changing, about dismantling the very empire that gave him his power. It was a monumental, almost impossible task. Can you do that? I asked, my voice filled with a hope I hadn't dared to feel before. Can you really walk away from it? Not walk away, he corrected gently. Transform it. It will take time. It will be dangerous. There are old alliances, old enemies who will not understand. But with you by my side, I believe it is possible. He reached into his pocket and pulled out not a velvet box but the tarnished silver locket. My mother's locket. He had recovered it, had it cleaned. It shone in the moonlight. This, he said, his voice thick with emotion, was a symbol of your past, of a secret that stood between us. He opened it. Inside, where the grim newspaper headline had been, were two new, perfectly crafted miniature portraits. One of my mother, one of my father. He had found old photographs, had them restored by an artist. He was giving me back my past, whole and unblemished. I want it to be a symbol of our future instead, he said, his eyes searching mine. A future where the name D'Amico is associated not with fear, but with strength. A future where the name Martinez is not a memory of a victim, but the name of the woman who is the heart of my family. The matriarch of a new legacy. Tears streamed down my face, but they were not tears of grief. They were tears of a profound, overwhelming joy. He was not just offering me love, or safety, or wealth. He was offering me a chance to build something new, something better, on the ashes of our broken pasts. He was offering me redemption, for both of us. Madison Martinez, he said, his voice dropping to a raw, heartfelt whisper. He didn't get down on one knee. It wasn't his style. He stood before me as my equal. I am a killer, and a sinner, and a man who does not deserve a second chance. But I love you, and I will spend every day for the rest of my life trying to be the man that you and your father would have been proud of. Will you be my wife? Will you build this new world with me? I looked at this impossible man, this king of the underworld who wanted to trade his iron throne for a place by my side. I saw our future, a long and complicated and dangerous and beautiful road stretching out before us. And I was not afraid. Yes, I whispered, my voice clear and strong in the quiet of the night. I will build it with you. He slid the locket around my neck, the cool metal a comforting weight against my skin, and then he kissed me. It was not the desperate, passionate kiss of the aftermath of a battle. It was a kiss of promise, a kiss of peace, a kiss that sealed the beginning of our new legacy, high above the sleeping city, under a canopy of 1,000,000 stars. The storm was finally over, and for the first time I could see the clear sky ahead.